Hello, today we're going to start looking at Lesson 8 using if-then moves and solving equations. So we have an equation here, and we know it's an equation because 3 plus 5 is 8, which is equal to 8. So we have two different expressions that are equal to each other. So for the first example, I've added 2 to each side of the equation. So I can add the same thing to each side, and the value remains the same. I can also subtract the same number from each side and the value remains the same. So just to kind of prove that, I'm going to say 3 plus 5 is 8, plus 2 is 10, and then I had 8 plus 2, which is 10. So those are equal to each other. Here I have 3 plus 5 is 8, minus 3 is 5, and then 8 minus 3 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8, times 6 is 48. And 8 times 6 is 48. So the key thing here is that you're doing the same thing to each side. In this example, we added 2 to each side. And when I say each side, I mean each side of the equation, each equivalent expression. Here I subtracted 3 from each side of the equation. Here I multiplied each side of the equation by 6. Okay. Moving on to example number 1. This is a word problem. We have Julia, Keller, and Israel. They're volunteer firefighters. On Saturday, the volunteer fire department held its annual coin drop fundraiser at a street light. After 1 hour, Keller had collected $42.50 more than Julia. Israel had collected $15 less than Keller. So here's Keller's minus $15. The three firefighters collected $125.95 in total. How much did each person collect? So Julia collected Julia. The important thing here is that I have each person's amount in terms of Julia, in terms of Julia's amount. If I didn't have each in terms of Julia's amount, if I was using different variables, then I wouldn't be able to figure out what Julia made and then figure out what each of these people made. Okay. Oh, and it tells us the amount of money collected by Julia is J dollars. Write an expression to represent the amount of money Keller collected in dollars. Already done that because it told us he collected $42.50 more than Julia. Using the expressions for Julia and Keller, write an expression to represent the amount of money Israel collected. So, Israel collected $15 less than Keller. So this was Keller's amount. And $15 less would be minus 15. Using the expressions written above, write an equation in terms of J that could be used to find the amount each person collected. So all together, that would be Julia plus Keller plus Israel is $125.95. So then I could combine like terms, have Julia's amount, and Julia's amount. So 3 times Julia's amount, and I'm going to $42.50 and $42.50 together is $85 minus the 15. I'm just combining all those would give me 70 equals $125.95. Maybe I want to write that a little closer to the line. 3J plus 70 equals. Then I could subtract 70 from each side. 3 times Julia's amount is $55.95. Again, line that up a little better. I'm just making this a little neater. And then divide each side by 3. And I'm going to find out what Julia's amount was. Okay, $55.95 divided by 3. So Julia's amount collected is $18.65. I'll take that way back up here. $18.65. And Keller collected Julia's amount plus $42.50. So that is $61.15. And we take the $61.15, we subtract $15 to figure out what Israel collected, and that gives us $46.15. The dollar signs always go in front of the amount. Now we'll move on to the next page. So this problem looks a little busy at the moment. This is about a new pet pen, and we're going to be putting fence around the pet pen. So anytime that we are putting fence around something, we are talking about the measurement of perimeter, because we're measuring the distance around. So in our problem, it tells us that the length is going to be 6 1/3 feet longer than the width. So if the width is W, then the length is going to be the width plus 6 1/3. And this is width, which means this side is also width because it's a rectangular pen. If the length is W plus 6 1/3, the length on this side is also W plus 6 1/3. I need to include all of these when I'm adding to come up with my 30 feet of fence. Otherwise, I would have an open area that the puppy could escape. So, I've written my equation, and I've said that is equal to 30, because that is my perimeter that I am fencing. Now I'm going to combine like terms. I have 4 W's, and 6 plus 6 is 12. 1/3 plus 1/3 is 2/3. So 4 W's plus 12 2/3 equals, this said 30, but I've marked it out and rewritten my 30 as 29 and 1, and I wrote the 1 as 3/3. That way I can subtract 12 2/3 from each side of my equation. Giving me 4W, or 4 times the width, is 17 1/3. Divide each side by 4. And this is the division that I've worked out. And I said 17 1/3 divided by 4. And I rewrote this as an improper fraction. Here's 17 times 3 plus 1 is 52 thirds divided by 4. So 52 thirds divided by 4/1. And you divide fractions by multiplying by the inverse. So 52 thirds times the inverse of 4/1 is 1/4, which gives me 52/12. And then I'm doing the division here. 52 into 12. 4 with 4 left over out of 12, which is 4 1/3. And that is my width. So for my dimensions, I've put 4 1/3 feet as the width. The length is going to be 4 1/3. that's W, plus 6 1/3, which gives me 10 2/3 feet. Okay. On to the next page. We have a question regarding Nancy and her morning routine. She gets dressed, eats breakfast, makes her bed, drives to work. So, she has her total time that will be represented here. 1/3 of her total time is spent getting dressed. 10 minutes she spends eating breakfast, 5 minutes making her bed, and the rest of the time driving to work. So we know that she spends 10 minutes for breakfast. Know that she spends 5 minutes making her bed, and the rest of this time is spent driving. So if we read closely here, we can see that 35.5 minutes is spent getting dressed, eating breakfast, and making her bed. So 1/3 of the total time plus 10 minutes plus 5 minutes is the 35.5 minutes. I'm going to combine these like terms. Switch colors also. The color doesn't show up too well. 1/3 of the time plus 15 minutes equals 35.5 minutes. Take away the time for breakfast and making the bed. 1/3 of the time equals 20.5 minutes. So 20.5, 20.5, 20.5. At this point, I can take a different color. I can take my 20.5, this one here, and subtract my 15. Okay, I'm working in this square. That gives me 5.5. So 20.5 is accounted for. There's 5.5 minutes left here, and there's 20.5 here. So all together, the driving time would be 20.5 plus 5.5, which gives me 26 minutes. Okay, for time's sake, I'm not going to read this question. I'm just going to show the diagram and walk through it. You could pause the video and read the question before you start. So 2/3 of the students were on the large bus. Okay, so that was 54 students. I divided 54 by 2 and figured out there was 27 people for each third. But then the chaperones had to be considered and ultimately taken away. So there's 27 students here, 27 students here, and 20 students here, giving me a total of 74 students. Algebraically, 2/3 of the students plus the 7 chaperones was 54. So I divided each side by 2/3, and that told me that the students plus the 7 chaperones was 81 people. Subtracted 7 from each side, and there were 74 students.